Picture running the pantry for hundreds of nights, servants and lords, inside a sprawling medieval castle. No fridges, no freezers, not even ice houses. Yet somehow these stone giants stored food that lasted months, sometimes even years. Sounds unthinkable now, right? But castle kitchens developed clever systems that kept armies of mouths fed, more than 1,000 people, for half a year or longer. So how was it done? The secret often lay beneath the ground. Medieval builders realized that if they dug deep under the fortress, nature itself provided the cooling. These enormous subterranean chambers acted like natural refrigerators, holding steady at about 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 13 degrees Celsius, no matter the season. The deeper you went, the colder it became, and architects designed tiered storage areas that made use of those temperature changes. At the lowest depths, where it dropped into the high 40s, you'd find milk, fresh meat, and cheeses. Just above that level sat the wine stores, arguably a higher priority for the noble class than even the meat. The upper tiers held apples, root vegetables, and barrels of preserved foods. These spaces sprawled so widely that servants often lost their way. To solve the problem, workers scratched chalk lines onto the walls to mark their routes back. A sort of medieval breadcrumb trail. At Dover Castle, one unlucky servant disappeared for 2 days before turning up asleep beside a wine cask. His excuse? He'd been lost and decided the wine was the only thing keeping him alive. Against all odds, he wasn't fired. Of course, these underground vaults weren't foolproof. Rats chewed their way through entire cheese stalks, and heavy rains sometimes turned storerooms into muddy indoor ponds, which is why castles leaned on another essential preservation method, salt. And salt wasn't just useful, it was priceless. The very words salary and worth your salt come from this era, when the mineral was as valuable as gold. One medium-sized fortress could burn through 5,000 pounds of salt every year, simply keeping food edible. Imagine filling a whole bedroom with nothing but salt. Castles even had a dedicated salt master, whose job was to know exactly which variety to use. Fine white salt handled milk products and tender cuts of meat. Rough sea salt tackled tougher meats and fish. The principle was simple. Salt drew moisture out of food and out of bacteria. With no water, nothing could rot. Good salt merchants became medieval millionaires. A single pound could buy you a sheep, and the richest salt traders commanded whole fleets of cargo ships. Naturally, some crooks tried to cheat the system. Records show fake salt being sold, ground up white stones masquerading as the real thing. Truly a salty scam. Medical men even pushed salted food as treatment. Head pounding? Try salted herring. Upset stomach? Preserved citrus might help. Compared to leeches and bloodletting, salted snacks were probably the least bizarre cures on the list. But salt wasn't the only trick. Smoking was equally vital. Every castle had a smoking yard, essentially a medieval meat factory. Think of a giant outdoor BBQ pit, minus the sauce debates. These smokehouses, able to handle 200 pounds of meat per day, stood just outside the castle to prevent fires, but close enough for guards to protect them. Why guards? Because for a household of 150, they needed more than 18,000 pounds of smoked meat to last the winter. No one wanted thieves sneaking off with a season's worth of bacon. Wood choice made all the difference. Oak was the standard, slow-burning, steady, perfect for ham. Applewood was reserved for delicacies like boar and venison during noble banquets. Alderwood was favored for fish, lending salmon that smoky sweetness we still prize. The smoke master, a skilled specialist, decided what wood to use and timed everything down to the hour. By late autumn, smokehouses ran day and night, with teams working shifts to keep embers alive. Some cuts cured in weeks. Large hams hung for 3 months before they were safe to eat. The techniques would look familiar to any modern pitmaster, though medieval cooks didn't bother photographing. their brisket for bragging rights. Vegetables, of course, required a different approach. Enter the world of pickling. Castle kitchens owned enormous ceramic vats, some holding 100 gallons, enough to pickle 800 pounds of produce in one batch. Excavations at castles have uncovered these vessels, confirming the scale. At Dover Castle, records reveal they pickled almost half of their yearly harvest, anywhere from 40 to 60%. Pickling transformed gardens into year-round vitamin supplies. And no, it wasn't just cucumbers or onions. They preserved nearly anything that could survive a vinegar bath, ensuring winter diets weren't entirely meat and bread. Castle kitchens pickled just about anything they could fit into a barrel. Cabbage? Certainly. Turnips? Without question. Eggs tinted in beet juice? Definitely. And the result was a vivid purple snack that must have made children laugh every time it appeared on the table. In some places, even imported fruits like lemons and oranges ended up in brine, prized so highly that only the lord's household was allowed a taste. One medieval manuscript even tells of a furious baron who threatened to toss his cook into the dungeon after discovering that his prized pickled plums had been served to ordinary soldiers. The gardens surrounding castles weren't planted for beauty alone. Large sections were set aside for herbs essential to the pickling trade. Dill, garlic, and mustard seed filled the beds year after year. But the true foundation of pickling lay in vinegar. Every well-supplied castle maintained its own vinegar works, usually hidden in a far corner, since fermenting liquids weren't exactly sweet-smelling. The craft was serious enough that some castles appointed an official pickle master whose job was to track every jar, barrel, and batch. Many of those recipe ledgers survived, giving us insight into their surprisingly advanced methods. They already knew that slipping grape leaves into a jar kept vegetables crisp, the same trick modern canners swear by. Alongside all the brine and vinegar, another substance played a starring role in preservation, one so effective that archaeologists have uncovered it still edible after millennia. Honey. Medieval lords were well aware of honey's unique qualities, which is why many fortresses kept sprawling apiaries just beyond the walls. These weren't random hives. They were carefully arranged near orchards and meadows to ensure steady nectar supplies. A strong castle operation might manage 100 hives scattered across the countryside, yielding enough honey for both storage and medicine. Beekeepers lived in cottages near the hives, making them unusual among castle workers since they didn't reside inside the fortress. They received decent wages and bonus rations of ale, a supposed defense against bee stings. Surprisingly, they were some of the better-paid specialists in the medieval world. The castle infirmary set aside its own honey stock, with lighter spring varieties used for cough syrups and wound dressings, and darker autumn honey saved for fruit preserves and meat storage. Special confections of fruit preserved in honey acted as a sort of medieval hospital candy, sweet encouragement for the sick. In the main kitchen, cooks found endless uses for honey. Fresh fruit could be dipped in warm honey to seal it, root vegetables layered between honey-soaked cloths, even fish packed into barrels of the golden syrup for long journeys. One cookbook even gives directions for immersing whole geese in honey, though it says nothing about how they kept greedy servants from sneaking spoonfuls from the barrel. Honey's science explains its success. An overload of sugar that denies microbes any water, natural hydrogen peroxide that kills germs, acidity that blocks growth, and enzymes from bees that boost its preservative punch. With qualities like that, it's no wonder castles valued their beekeepers almost as highly as their masons. And speaking of masons, the very design of castles played a massive role in keeping food safe. Architecture doubled as preservation technology. Builders designed everything from cavernous grain stores that held 20,000 pounds of wheat to damp little cheese caves with just the right humidity. Calculations were exact. One formula demanded roughly 1,000 square feet of storage for every 100 mouths to feed. Their cooling systems were just as ingenious. Using what we now call pressure differential ventilation, they carved narrow shafts running from cellars to high towers. When winds blew across the tops, they created suction that drew up cooler underground air. One Welsh fortress became so comfortable that servants would retreat to its storerooms in summer just to beat the heat. Even pests were factored into construction. Builders built ledges that rats couldn't scale, angled walls that mice struggled to climb, and sometimes mixed herbs into mortar to repel vermin. Certain fortresses even added cat-only passageways so feline hunters could patrol inside the walls. The kitchens themselves became specialized zones. The buttery stored drinks, the pantry held bread and dry supplies, and the spicery safeguarded costly spices, each chamber with its own airflow. Some even had dedicated cheese rooms with tilted shelving for whey drainage. One unfortunate steward complained in writing that the cheese room was placed too close to the Lord's bedchamber, where the powerful smell was apparently too much for noble noses. Still, architecture alone couldn't preserve the food without people. Behind every barrel and chamber stood a small army of workers, whose sole task was to keep provisions from spoiling. Running a medieval castle's kitchen wasn't so different from running a miniature city. At the top of that chain stood the master cook. Beneath the master cook, around 50 staff kept the castle's massive food system alive, with about 15 devoted entirely to preservation and storage. Surviving payroll records from one fortress show that the preservation master, a specialist cook, earned the value of 30 sheep a year, quite the reward for making sure noble banquets didn't turn sour. Kitchen apprentices began their training young, often at just 12 years old. Before they were allowed near a pot, they spent 2 long years mastering preservation basics, recognizing spoiled meat by smell. Not the most pleasant first lesson. Learning how to rotate food stocks and guarding winter stores from nobles eager to raid them too soon. One surviving apprentice diary groans about memorizing over 200 separate storage rules before finally being trusted with anything beyond humble turnips. Record keeping was seamlessly woven into kitchen life. Head cooks relied on tally sticks with carved notches, parchment lists, and different systems depending on the food. Barrels of wine carried chalk marks, grain was measured with standardized scoops, and preserved meats each bore numbered tags. Archaeologists have even uncovered loaded dice near castle hearths, perhaps used during breaks, and recipe notes scratched right on the kitchen walls. But the system faced its toughest trials when the seasons shifted. Each season brought unique preservation challenges. Spring began with frantic smoking and pickling of winter stores, which were just beginning to spoil. By early summer, herbs were being harvested, bundled, and hung to dry. The summer months flooded kitchens with fruits and vegetables, all needing urgent preservation. Records from 1 August show over 2,000 pounds of produce processed in just 1 week. Autumn marked the preservation high point, with teams salting, smoking, and pickling at full speed. Whole staff preservation festivals sometimes took place, though evidence suggests these were as much about drinking ale as preserving food. One record even tells of a cook who accidentally pickled his keys during one of these boozy events. Winter was a different kind of test. The master cook had to ration supplies carefully. Overspending in December could mean empty stores by March. Castles typically divided the cold months into 3 phases. Fresh stores in early winter, when the newest preserved foods were still on hand. Deep stores for the harsh middle months. And scraping by in late winter, when cooks had to get creative whatever scraps remained. Weather forecasting became part of survival. Staff tracked cloud patterns, animal habits, and other signs. One cook noted that if mice hoarded food before the first frost, a brutal winter was ahead. Medieval meteorology in action. Of course, disaster sometimes struck. During the famous 1216 siege of Dover Castle, stored food proved crucial. But sheer quantity wasn't enough, it had to remain edible. When the main cellar flooded, the staff scrambled to haul tons of food to safety overnight. They succeeded, though one poor cook ended up locked in a storeroom for 6 hours. Emergency fixes became second nature. Rats gnawing through grain sacks led to storage in sealed clay pots. After mold ruined a year's cheese supply, cooks began rotating wheels daily and rubbing them with vinegar. Food tasters weren't just poison detectors. They doubled as spoilage testers. Preservation demanded sharp senses. The sound of a tapped jar, the firmness of cured meat, the hue of pickled vegetables. One cook's manual quipped, "If your pickled eggs turn green, feed them to your enemies." Dark humor aside, records suggest spoilage claimed about 20% of food annually impressive for an age without refrigeration. When supplies did fail, kitchens improvised. Grains were sprouted on windowsills, meats smoked in haste, and spoiled wine converted to vinegar. Yet despite hardships, many medieval methods outlived their inventors. Today's smoky hams, artisanal pickles, and even family tricks for keeping vegetables fresh echo skills honed centuries ago. These techniques weren't just about survival. They created flavors we still celebrate.